I'm at a different place.
Okay.
So, will you?
Hey, do you have corals?
Yeah, they're
Okay.
on. Okay, Jay, could you try unmuting yourself again? I couldn't hear you last time.
No. Okay.
Was there volume on that?
Okay. I'm just gonna go. Thanks.
No.
Video meeting.
I don't know, and it's always like patched together and, you know,
That's
they
okay.
sit on a
Could've
paper
laid on
clip
your
and.
lap.
I mean, just hit a button, you know?
It's like you're not even there.
Sometimes it gets physical.
I know.
Jerry's still here, Jerry.
Hi, Jerry. My house,
Jerry Klein?
I work from home.
Can you come up here?
I have teams everywhere.
Need some more
Hey,
button
Bridget,
pushing.
could you try unmuting yourself to see if we could hear you?
Let's see what you say. So,
Nope. We can't hear them. Unmuted. And usually it's, you have to be on the LTTV for the sound. And it sounds funny. Where you can hear it. But it's, see if I can go into WebEx. Okay, Bridget, I think we, yep, now I think we can hear you.
All right,
Jake, can you test yours again?
this is Jake. Can you hear me?
Yes, can you still see us?
I can see you, yeah, but I'm having some issues with my camera, but I guess maybe you don't need to see us. Can you hear us? Yeah. Okay.
Okay, as long as we can see your presentation, we'll be good.
Good, okay, yep. We can't always have a copy of it too.
Okay. Good evening. It is 6:34 p.m., January 14th, 2025, and you are at a Common Council meeting of the City of Wausau in the City Hall Council Chambers. Please join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. Pledge of
allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Would the clerk call the roll, please?
We have 11 voting members present.
Okay, we have one proclamation tonight, and I'm going to just paraphrase it. I will be reading this officially. January 19th at the Martin Luther King Jr. Day down at Marathon Park. So the proclamation reads, Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. was born in Atlanta, Georgia on January 15th, 1929, and was assassinated in Memphis, Tennessee on April 4th, 1968, leaving behind a legacy of civil rights activism that continues to shape American culture to this day. And whereas to honor the legacy of Dr. King in its entirety, we must explore and emulate his use of nonviolence to promote change and call people to commit to public service for the common good. Real change comes only when people act openly and honestly with one another and accept the lived experiences we each bring to the conversation of civil rights. Now therefore be it resolved that I, Doug Denny, Mayor, City of Wausau, do hereby proclaim January 20th, Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. Day in the City of Wausau, and I commend this observance to all citizens. Again, if you're interested in the event, I think they have 100 tickets. There may be some left. Check us out on our Facebook page. There's a link to that. And I do have just one New Year's proclamation I'm going to impromptu put out here for the clerk's sake. I'd like to proclaim 2025 as the 6-day rule, and it would go something like whereas the council has established the 6-day rule to provide ample time to prepare for citizens and council, and whereas the clerk has issued guidelines and timelines to directors with procedures for the agenda packet material, and whereas the clerk provides a draft 1 week in advance to directors and the mayor for review, and whereas the clerk is undergoing new software that will help guide this and make it easier for us. So let us resolve to appreciate the work of the clerk's office with the added time available to prepare, ask for clarifying questions, and work on our precision of thought, economy of expression, and let's make some efficient meetings here in 2025. And just, I used that term a few times and I forgot where I got it from. It was Dr. Anthony Fauci. You can look him up, 2028 New England Medical Journal article. So that is the proclamation. Those are the proclamations tonight. We have up next pre-registered citizens for matters appearing on the agenda. And we have 3. Up first is Joanne Leonard.
I'm Joanne Leonard, 923 Maple Hill Road, Wausau. Good evening, and thank you for the opportunity to comment on agenda item 25-0108, resolution approving bid for construction of single-family housing approved by the City Economic Development Committee. First of all, I'm not a real estate genius. I don't pretend to be, but the numbers for the request on the economic development's request and resolution do not add up. I was shocked, and many other residents are also. Many have spoken to me about a $348,000 construction proposal for a single-family house built on city-owned property and sold as affordable housing for $140,000 or plus. Many unanswered questions about this resolution. I don't know how many people sitting in this audience would build a $348,000 house as an investment, then sell it to the lowest bidder for $140,000. The implication is that the $348,000 isn't city taxpayer dollars, but coming from 3 different funding sources. WIDA, CDB, and ARPA are all taxpayer-funded organizations. I looked at the bid and the details of this house. It is being advertised as 2 bedrooms, 1 bath on the 1,170 square foot upper main level. That's a pretty small house for $348,000. The specs list 1,170 square feet with another 3 bedroom, bedroom and bath in the basement unfinished. The detached garage is listed as a 567 square foot unfinished garage. So, without going into any more detail, this is a $140,000 house built at a cost of $348,000 to the taxpayer. Habitat for Humanity has built, on average, 2 houses a year. Yes, I am understanding their costs have gone up also, but nowhere have I seen a $348,000 price tag on any of their houses. Whose problem is it that the city can't get bids for these projects? You might want to take a look at your process. Wausau wonders why we are losing population. It is crazy policies like these and the love of continually borrowing, driving up debt that have sent taxes over the top. People can't afford to live here in their affordable houses. Common sense has been lost. Spending on the back of taxpayers is never ending. Why not look to other communities with successful, affordable, single-family housing programs and projects? Ask the community for some ideas for affordable housing. And by the way, I would like a definition of affordable housing. Most people save for their affordable house. We did. I urge the council to vote no on this project. The taxpayers elected a mayor to stand up for us. It is time that he does and says this is enough. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. Up next is Jonathan Smith.
Hello, Jonathan Smith, 1114 Prospect Avenue, and I'm here to speak on an item in the consent agenda, the 2025 street reconstruction projects. I'm fully in favor of the budget for these projects and would like that to continue and to not be delayed. And I just wanted to bring up that the City Council and the Bicycle and Pedestrian Advisory Committee of the city adopted the Safe Routes to School program, or the Safe Routes to School plan. And within that, there were multiple safety improvements for Randolph Street that could be really beneficial for the city and for the safety of our youngest citizens. There are multiple improvements outlined in the plan, and I'm not certain if those are included in the reconstruction progress or idea that we are about to open bids to for the city. So I just recommend if safety improvements around Thomas Jefferson Elementary, which will become an even more impactful school with 4 of our elementary schools closing, if that is a priority for you, to speak up and to share that it might make sense to give some time to redesign for Randolph Street before reconstruction of the status quo. There are the possibilities of a bike lane and looking at or a 10-foot multi-use path. There were pedestrian crossing improvements that were written in there, and it's a really solid plan. And with our youngest kids going to that school, with that area of the city being the second most disadvantaged when it comes to housing costs, transportation costs, and with of the students and parents surveyed, none of them currently bike to school. And I don't think that's because their budgets for their housing and transportation wouldn't benefit from that opportunity. It's because it's currently unsafe for them to do so. So I would highly recommend just bringing that up to your staff, and that it is an important thing to add in that Safe Routes to School plan. And thank you for your time.
Thank you, Jonathan, member of the Bike Ped Committee, all in on bikes. I like the little bike neck warmer you got going on. Awesome. Thanks. Up next, Maggie Cronin.
Good evening. Maggie Cronin, 311 Summit Drive, Wausau. I attended the Economic Development Committee last week regarding a proposal to build a home and turn around and sell it at a great loss in an effort to provide affordable housing on Bridge Street. I understand without committee approval, the city could not go back to the developer to scale this proposal back. I don't believe the downsizing would even come close to the savings needed to make this a wise decision for the city. I appreciate Alder Hankey's remarks about the frustration of proposals being brought forward only to be turned down time and time and time again. We all want affordable housing in the city, but I have spoken to many people in the last week, and not one taxpayer thought that this proposal was a good idea. There are many ways to address affordable housing. One of the best ways is to lower taxes and utilities for residents as well as landlords. I understand home ownership is the goal. I believe there is a need for more education to be done in the public on how to achieve that goal, putting the responsibility onto the residents. Many of us are children of parents who grew up in the Depression era. I sure wish I would have listened to the stories on how my parents and grandparents survived. I recall stories of them renting one-bedroom apartments, getting roommates to share expenses. At a young age, they encouraged us to work, stay in school, and live at home to save funds for home ownership. Where has that gone? In the housing collapse in previous years, some experts believe that one of the reasons that the market collapsed was the money was being lent to those that had no business owning a home. It's just not about the mortgage, the lawn, the snow removal, the repairs, the taxes, the insurance, and the unexpected expenses that take a bite out of the family budget. We could be setting up fellow unprepared residents with this plan for failure on the back of the taxpayer. I would like to see more research on the programs like Habitat for Humanity, who have a proven model. It's not time for the city to become real estate agents or home builders. Putting funds into an infill housing fund to be used for another project time and time again sounds like a lot of paperwork. Next thing we know, you'll be asking us to add staff to keep track of it all. Wausau can do better. While I appreciate the work that Tammy and her staff did with this proposal, I do not believe it's in the best interest of the city. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. And before we get to that item, we are going to have a presentation from Quarles and Brady via online presence tonight on the role of bond counsel. We've got this scheduled for 20 minutes, and we'll have about 10 minutes of questions and answers. We'll take as many as we need. So do we have Bridget and Jake online? Who's going first?
We are here, and I think, so I'll just introduce myself and then hand it over to Jake. My name is Bridget Keating. I am from Quarles and Brady, as the mayor said. We were selected to be the city's bond counsel, I believe in 2014. And I've been working on the city's bond issue since that time. And my colleague Jake Lichter has been along with Rebecca Speckhart, who recently retired. And so Jake Lichter has joined our team and has, we've put together a PowerPoint presentation that Jake will share with conversation. So with that, I'll turn it over to Jake.
Yeah, well, thank you, Bridget, and good evening, everyone. As Bridget said, my name is Jake Lichter, and along with Bridget, represent the city in the role of bond counsel. As Bridget noted, and as you probably have in front of you, we prepared a presentation to go over our role as the city's bond counsel, and then to give the city and city staff just a brief overview of the types of debt that the city has outstanding, at which point we'll kind of lay out really big picture terms in terms of what limitations are associated with those different types of debt that the city has outstanding. Before I jump in, does the council have the presentation we prepared in front of you? Is that something you need us to share on our screens, or should I just kind of turn through it and let you know when to turn the page?
We do have it pulled up.
We have it on the big screen.
Okay, perfect.
Yeah, Caitlin can.
So, as I noted, the second slide there, the second page is the agenda. And I'll quickly go over our role as bond counsel. I'll describe debt generally, and then debt as it relates to the city's outstanding obligations. And then I'll describe big picture, kind of the two types of debt that the city has currently outstanding. And then we will take some time to address any questions that anyone may have. So on page 3, we have the role of bond counsel. And our role as bond counsel is a limited special engagement with the city. And we are engaged, of course, to represent the city in connection with all of your bond issues, but our role starts, kind of when you decide to issue a bond, and then it ends when the bond issue closes. And the primary function of our role as bond counsel is to provide an objective legal opinion on the validity and tax treatment of the bonds that is relied on the bond owners, can be relied on the city, and really any other representatives of the transaction. As part of that final delivery of the opinion, we review and ensure that the city is complying with all state laws and federal tax laws related to the debt that's being issued, and we draft resolutions for the council to consider, which authorizes the debt and sets forth the terms thereof, along with a bunch of other documentation that helps to document the compliance with the relevant rules and regulations. In addition to our role as bond counsel, Quarles and Brady also serves as disclosure counsel to the city anytime the city issues debt on the open market. And in connection with that role, we review and ensure that the city is complying with all securities laws. In connection with debt issuances in particular, make sure that the city is exercising its due diligence to ensure that there are no material misstatements or omissions in any offering document that's used to sell debt. The next page of the presentation is entitled Defining Debt. And of course, everyone knows what debt is, right? You have an obligation to pay somebody back if you borrow something from that person. But under the state and statutes and the Wisconsin Constitution, while that concept generally applies to any form of indebtedness that the city enters into, there are different buckets of types of debt that have different rules and regulations that the city needs to comply with in connection with its issuance. In addition, during the course of this conversation, or just really any conversation you may hear about the city's debt, you'll refer to debt being notes, bonds, loan, or any of those terms are really just terms to describe debt. The state statutes do specifically say if something is a bond, it should be called a bond, right? But the concept is a loan and a bond are really the same thing. It's just how you call them under the state statutes. They're all financing vehicles where the city is obligated to pay back somebody else for money that is borrowed. So, as I said, the city has two types of debt currently outstanding. One of those issues being general obligation debt, and one of the other kind of buckets being revenue debt. And both revenue debt and general obligation debt can be sold and owned by a variety of parties. Most typically, and the types of debt that the city currently has outstanding, those obligations are sold either on the open market via an offering document, or placed with the state through the state trust fund loan program, or the clean water fund loan, or safe drinking water loan programs. Or thirdly, the city may place some debt with a local bank as well. Of those two buckets, one of them is general obligation debt. And kind of the big question that we look at, aside from, of course, compliance with the rules and regulations, is what kind of debt are we issuing here? Is it general obligation debt? Is it revenue-backed debt? And what dictates that determination is the source of repayment of said debt. So general obligation debt is debt that the city pledges its full faith and credit to repay, and the city levies an irrepealable tax on all of its property in an amount sufficient to repay that tax. That debt. That tax cannot be repealed, and the collection of it cannot be obstructed until all of the general obligation debt, which is secured by said taxes, is paid in full. So to the extent the city were ever to default in its payment of general obligation debt, which, knock on wood, that would never happen, but the owners of those bonds would be able to sue the city and force them to place on your tax rolls in amount sufficient to pay back said debt. And because the general obligation debt is secured by the city's full faith and credit, general obligation debt is generally the least expensive, safest type of debt that you can issue. But because of the security that the city is committing when they issue general obligation debt, the state statutes and the Wisconsin statutes, the Wisconsin Constitution apply certain limitations to the amount of general obligation debt that the city may incur at any given time. And that big kind of limitation is that the city can never have general obligation debt outstanding in an amount that exceeds 5% of the city's equalized value. So if you have that presentation that we provided on page 7, we have a snippet of which we pulled from the city's most recent offering document, which sold general obligation debt, but it shows the city's current equalized value and then multiplies that amount by 5% to show you the statutory debt limit of about $219 million. The city has currently about $69 million outstanding, so well within that statutory and constitutional debt limit, which leaves the city, to the extent the city chose to, about $150 million of unused capacity. So if the city decided to issue $150 million of debt tomorrow, we're not saying that's a good idea or a bad idea, but would be legally allowed to do so. There are certain policies that the city has in place and that other communities have in place that further limit the city's kind of best practice in terms of how much debt you should have. So not everyone, just because the Constitution allows you to issue 5% of your equalized value in debt, many municipalities further limit that with internal policies. And then if we flip ahead to page 8, this kind of describes the big picture of what revenue bonds are. So as opposed to general obligation debt, revenue debt is not considered a general obligation of the city and thus is not secured by the city's general credit or taxing power. But rather, those revenue bonds are secured by the net revenues of a utility system. So the city has sewer system revenue bonds outstanding, water system revenue bonds outstanding, and those respective bonds are secured, as the name would imply, by the net revenues of the respective sewer system or water system. Because those bonds are a little less secure than general obligation bonds, because the security, of course, is revenues and not a irrepealable tax levy, there are certain mechanisms that the market has to enhance the security and allow the city to get better interest rates. One of that is a reserve fund, which is funded at the time of issuance of the city's revenue bonds. So if the city does a debt transaction in the market generally requires the city to fund a reserve account, which is funded in generally about 1 year's debt service. So if you issue bonds tomorrow, and you would be asked to fund a reserve account, which would, in the unlikely event you had insufficient net revenues to pay those bonds back in any given year, that reserve account could be drawn upon and used to service that debt. Other limitations that are in place with respect to revenue bonds to help ensure that the city will always be in a position to pay them back. Anytime you adopt a resolution authorizing revenue bonds, those resolutions will contain a coverage covenant, which in essence the city promises to establish rates and charges of the respective system in such amount as to guarantee that the net revenues of that system will be at least equal to 100% at minimum of any debt service coming due in the future. So you'll always have sufficient funds, at least you promise to always attempt to have sufficient revenues to pay back your debt. The amount of that coverage requirement, whether it's 110%, 125%, depends on the purchaser of the bonds and said debt. Typically, the city's market revenue bonds require you to have 125% coverage requirement. So if you have $100,000 of debt coming due in 2025, that coverage requirement would require the city's respective utility to have net revenues of at least $125,000. Unlike the market debt, the state's Clean Water and Safe Drinking Water Loan Program has a little bit more of a lenient debt service coverage requirement, and that's a 110% requirement. However, their test includes a caveat that says if there's any other coverage outstanding which is higher than our 110% requirement, the default is whatever the highest is. So for purposes of the city's revenue debt, your coverage requirement at this time is 125%. Similar to the coverage requirement, and just to ensure that the city isn't overburdening itself with debt and putting itself in a position to not be able to repay future issuance of bonds, all of the city's revenue bond resolutions authorizing revenue bonds contain what we refer to as an additional bonds test. And that in essence says the city cannot incur additional indebtedness which is secured by the revenues of a respective utility unless that utility can demonstrate that the year prior to the issuance of said bonds, the net revenues were at least 125% of debt service, the highest debt service coming due in a future year. So I guess the best way to put that is if in 2032 you've got $5 million of debt coming due, you would have to show in order to issue new bonds in 2025 that your 2024 net revenues were at least 6.5 million or whatever that math would exactly break out to. And then finally, because the state, owns Clean Water Fund and Safe Drinking Water loans, and they write the statutes, they have included two special provisions that only apply to Clean Water Fund and Safe Drinking Water loans. And those statutory provisions are, of course, meant to enhance the security of the Clean Water Fund loans and the Safe Drinking Water loans, and they don't apply to the city's market debt. But in the event that the city were to ever default on your Clean Water or Safe Drinking Water loans, the state may collect those unpaid amounts by deducting any state payments due to the city, or alternatively, the state can require the county to pay the city's debt when they apportion taxes. So that is, I know, a lot of information in a short period of time, but I and Bridget are both more than happy to pause here and let you guys digest what I just laid out and ask any questions that you may have.
Thank you. Questions? Alder Tierney.
My question is that, like the clean water bond is not considered debt of the city or on the city debt, but yet when you were talking about this, you were talking about just toward the end that if the city couldn't pay that the state can do other things to get that money back. So I guess my question is, how can it not be debt for the city? Because you were saying that, the utility is responsible for it, but yet you were telling about all the times that the city would have to pay back, or if the city didn't pay back, what would happen? So I guess I don't understand how this is not part of the city debt.
No, that's a very fair question. And to just take a step back, it is debt in the sense that the city is responsible for repaying the obligations. It is not debt as defined by certain Wisconsin case law and the Wisconsin statutes and the Constitution when it comes to applying like the 5% equalized value limitation. So it is certainly an obligation of the city. It is just not a general obligation of the city, which would count towards its 5% limitation on the amount of debt outstanding. And like I said, while the state has those provisions to enforce payment, they can't levy a tax or anything like that on the city, right? A decision not to pay the revenue bonds may result in adverse consequences, like the withholding of state payments to the city, but the city can't, or the state can't come in and add a tax to the tax rolls or force the city to do that to the citizens. So the concept's a little convoluted, I will freely admit that, and I don't know if that's a sufficient answer, and I'll let Bridget chime in if she has anything she wants to add to clarify that response. But that's what I would say in response to your question, which is a fair question.
Yeah, it just seems that when you're saying the city's debt is, I don't know, what was it, 69 million? That's not accurate, because,
So that's the city's, again, to distinguish, that's the city's general obligation. It's not the amount of indebtedness that the city has. And the general obligation that the city has is subject to certain limitations set forth in the Wisconsin Constitution that don't apply to revenue debt, i.e. debt that's secured by the revenues of a utility.
seems like kind of a slippery slope. Because it just seems long and short of it, the city is responsible for paying back, whether it's generalized or the bonds, in my opinion, the way it was explained.
So you are correct, the city is responsible for paying both back. The question is just more, what is the source of that repayment? And that's the distinction legally.
And if I could just add, I mean, the utility is the city. Like we are not two separate corporations. We have one federal ID number, we have one existence. The commission, through state statutes, is given certain authorities. Obviously, we've named the utility the Water Works Commission, but it is, we are the city of Wausau. So it is, like, whether it's a revenue bond or the clean water and the state drinking water, the city is making the payments because we are the city. The utility is the city. Again, and I'm not a lawyer, but it's the pledging of the revenues that really is the focus on whether the 5% is included. If it's included in the 5%, and there's, I understand, a separate section in the Constitution of the state of Wisconsin that specifically refers to these types of revenue debt, which is different than the portion that describes the 5%.
Right, and the Wisconsin Constitution explicitly carves out these revenue obligations from having to be included in that 5% calculation. And to that point, they are all the city's debt. The council, anytime there's a revenue bond or a general obligation bond, the council does have to authorize that. It is not a decision for the city's officers to make. Of course, they can have their input as to what's the best decision for the city, but any debt, and that's part of our job, is to make sure that it's authorized by the council with the proper vote and all of that.
Thank you. Further questions?
I guess I would just add, I think Bridget mentioned that in 2014, we began services with Quarles and Brady. That was after we competitively procured bond counsel services. We presented an RFP to the Finance Committee on April 8th of 2014. I believe Keen Winters made the motion to go out for RFP and approve that RFP. Then July of 2014, the Finance Committee conducted interviews with all of the representatives that were interested in providing services in the Finance Committee. After looking at the qualifications of the bidding or the proposing firms, it was a unanimous vote at the Finance Committee to approve Quarles. There is, while we could go out for proposal every year if we wanted to for bond counsel, there's value in retaining a long-term relationship with bond counsel. Again, if you're going to refinance debt, you have to look back to the original issuance of that debt and having some continuity of information. The original documentation is very helpful, and I think that is to the city's benefit, which is why we have not gone out for RFP on a regular basis. In 2014, Foley and Lardner had been our bond counsel. The main individual who was serving the city was retiring at that time. And so we felt that that was a good time to reconsider or re-look at that service. But again, back when we started issuing the water and sewer debt issues, hiring disclosure counsel is considered a best practice for debt issuance. That process is having that counsel look at your official statement to ensure that you are properly disclosing all of your debt and any commitments and contingencies in that disclosure. Because if we would, for example, misrepresent ourselves, there would be a risk for the city. If, let's say, we did default on the debt, a bondholder can come back and say, I relied on your official statement when I purchased this debt. And because there were inaccurate or false statements in there, you are then liable for that failure. With the new issues for the water and sewer, I felt it was very important for us to increase our focus to make sure that we were disclosing properly to Moody's, to the bondholders. Also, I think one of the big issues that we talked about a lot when we were going through our disclosures before we issued debt was, typically when the city says we're going to issue a bond for $6 million, on settlement day, we get our $6 million. That's now added to our debt, and it's easy to report that. With the clean water and the safe drinking water loans, we agree, we sign an FAA that says, like our max loan is $42 million, let's say, but that money is drawn over time like a construction loan. And so we wanted to verify and make sure, because in the beginning, let's say we only had $2 million of safe drinking water loan outstanding, but we had planned and expected to issue $42 million. I wanted to make sure that we were disclosing that properly in all of our official statements. So having a disclosure counsel who is an independent person work with us to ensure that all I's are crossed, I's are dotted, T's are crossed, I always do that, was important. And so I think we've really worked hard to make sure that those disclosures are properly stated. And obviously, Moody's is rating the water and sewer utility separately, as well as the city. So we're having individual conversations with Moody's about the water and sewer utility as well.
Thank you. Alder Rasmussen.
Thank you. I think that's important knowledge, and I'm glad that we had this discussion in a council setting. I do hope that also our media partners that watch our meetings online report on this presentation. I think it's important to recognize that what we heard, and I guess bond counsel can clarify for me if I heard them wrong, that their specific purpose in their engagement with us is to ensure that we are in compliance with state and federal guidelines with regard to issuing and reporting our debt, and to make sure that documents we issue that bondholders rely on are properly completed before that debt is sold. Is that correct?
That is exactly correct.
Okay, and then based on the length of your relationship with us since 2014, the city of Wausau's debt right now is properly sold, negotiated, and reported. We are not out of compliance or over or even close to the limit on general obligation at this point.
100% correct.
Thank you. And I think that is something that's important, because I think there's been a lot of chatter out in the community about propriety, about reporting, about accuracy. There's been accusations made, and I think it's very, very important that the facts get out. And so I am so glad that we had this presentation tonight, because bond counsel, I think just their mere presence is a protective contract, really, not only for the city employees, but the city as a corporate entity, but for all of us who are approving that debt. You know, and I think that relationship, the value of that can't be understated. So thank you so much for that.
Thank you. Alder Larson.
Thank you.
Yes, I just want to echo on those thoughts and thank you, Quarles, and thank you, Mary Ann, for your presentation on that. You know, and I'm sure that the complaint is on the back of everybody's mind, and this clears up a lot of stuff, you know, and as Alder Rasmussen said, I hope the media picks up on it as well. It's a shame that, you know, it's a shame that what has happened has insulted your intelligence and has insulted the city, insulted the attention and integrity of the city.
Right. And the
You know,
confidence of the taxpayers.
And the confidence of the city.
Mhm.
And I just want to say thank you for all you've done, both Ann and Mary Ann, and keep up the good work. Thank you.
I would like to just add one more thing, and that is, you know, annually, we have an audit. An independent body comes in and does an audit. Their opinion contains statements that we are complying with state laws and regulations. And when they audit the city, not only do they go in and look at transactions and look at the accounting records, but their statement really is about the financial statements themselves. And that opinion also includes our footnotes. So the footnotes is where our listing of debt is and how much general obligation, that 5% computation is in our footnotes. But the auditors basically are opining on the fair presentation of that. So that is yet sort of a second check for the city that we know that that presentation is properly. And while historically the city has prepared its own financial statements and the auditors have just done a review when we were working on the Workday implementation, because that was such a horrendous project for us to undertake, we did actually retain the services of our CPA firm to do the report itself. So they're preparing the report and they're opining on that report. And there's nothing in, you know, the regulations that prevent them from doing that, because even though they're preparing the report on our behalf, the city is taking responsibility for that report and saying, you know, we believe that to be accurate and true. So we have multiple safeguards, I guess, to ensure that we are disclosing information appropriately.
Thank you. Thank you. Anyone else? All right, and you know, just context is important. So this is opening up a discussion on the reporting, and there's another component of this, and that is our overall debt scenario and our strategy on debt, and that is not a component that falls into the purview of Quarles and Brady. We rely on our financial analysts for that and others. So as we have the lead service line replacement loans coming due, as I understand it, Quarles and Brady will make the determination when we determine, we haven't determined yet which buckets these are going to be in, whether they're general obligation, revenue, TIDS. We'll work on that strategy, and Quarles will play their part in the bond rating. But we still have, we cannot ignore the fact that we have a lot of debt hanging out there on the utility. And as Alder Tierney mentions, that is our debt. So how is that in the grand scheme of things, and how do we move forward with that? If we're in that 5% area, we still need to manage it. So I think this is a good starting point for this discussion. Anything further from Quarles and Brady? Bridget, I appreciate you coming up or coming through the screen for us.
I don't have anything further, but we're always happy to come to a council meeting like this if there is a resolution and, alders have questions about what are those covenants that are in this resolution, or what are we promising. We are happy to come back and talk specifics on a specific borrowing.
Thank you. Jake? All right.
Yeah, nothing more from me. Thank you all very much for your time. I apologize, I can't seem to figure out how to get this video to work on WebEx. I've mastered Zoom and Teams, but for whatever reason, I'm struggling with WebEx here. Maybe I need to download the latest version or something.
All right.
Thank you all,
Clerk's gonna
and
cut
like
you
Bridget
out.
said, feel free to reach out at any point.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you for the opportunity to work with the city.
Okay, up next is our consent agenda, and we have one item that is not ready for consent, and it is going to be pulled for a future date, and that is 25-0103, the ordinance on Wausau Municipal Code 3.25.100. So that file is being pulled. So we are looking for a motion from for consent, and we have from Larson, second from Watson. I have Alder Henke.
Thank you. I just wanted to adjust the public comment tonight and say we will definitely make sure going through INF that any bike ped recommendations are added to that. And Eric, I guess what's kind of the next step in the bid process, if you don't mind? When will we see plans and?
Yeah, so the plans are pretty much designed, so once this approval goes through, they will go out on the street for bid. Yeah, they don't, so they'll be done. So if there's certain things that you want to see in infrastructure or anything, if you want to see the final plans, you just let us know and we can bring them forward.
Sure, that might be worth a review again. And
Okay.
one more time.
Can do.
Yep, thank you.
Thank you. Alder Lukens.
Thank you. I would just like to second Alder Henke's comments, especially coming from the school standpoint and the importance of that, especially with the Wausau districts, school districts, changes to the elementary schools. I think that's a really good idea, and I'm really grateful for the public comment, bringing that to our awareness. Thank you.
Thank you. Seeing nothing further.
You may begin voting. Motion passes 11-0.
And we don't have any mayor's appointments tonight, do we? No. Up next is file number 25-0106. This is an ED resolution approved 3-2, approving bid for construction of single-family infill housing for 1019 West Bridge Street with Brian Lutke and Associates Constructions LLC. And I have a motion from Lukens, second from Henke. Alder Rasmussen.
Thank you, Mayor. I have to say, I appreciate the comment that we've received from a number of constituents this week surrounding this item. I think that the Economic Development Committee and the staff started out with the best of intentions 2 years ago. We approved a sum of ARPA dollars that we wanted to devote to affordable housing. At that point, we were looking at a proposal to see if it was possible to, find some of these lots that we have available and maybe construct 5 or 6 affordable homes on them and then be able to sell those homes. I think what's happened, though, is the market conditions are just such that such a plan is just not feasible by the numbers. And I will say that in my private sector work, one thing I do every day is calculate the rebuild cost of homes and buildings. And the costs that we're seeing for this particular home in our current economy are not out of line. I've been astounded in the last 2 years at the calculations that I've seen come up on what I considered to be normal houses. And they are not coming in to replace them at normal prices. And we rebuild them as is. So, it's not an anomaly that this particular house appears to be extremely expensive. They all are. And So I think what we need to have here really is really two things. I think that when we look at, and our staff has really been trying to find a way to allocate and create things with this ARPA money for a long time. We've invested an awful lot of staff time in trying to figure out first what to do with some of these lots and what to put on them, what the neighborhoods want to see, what they should cost, who our target market is to buy them. Alder McElhaney made a valid point this week about the tax responsibility for a home of this value, even if you purchase it cheaper. Can you afford that tax bill? And, I think that's something that should weigh heavily on us as well. You don't want to set people up to fail. And, I think what we need, though, is when we look at the investment of those ARPA dollars going forward, we need to find projects that make a larger impact for more people. A $200,000 loss to assist one family is a noble gesture, but it's still a huge, huge amount of money for one benefit. And I think what we need is projects, and whether they're maybe higher density, if you can get, 4, 6, 8, 10 units instead of one, for those projects. Maybe we need to be looking for those larger volume opportunities so we can make that larger impact. The other thing that we would need to have happen, I think, to even make single-family homes in this realm a reasonable option, is we're going to need some time to see some calming of the market volatility. And it's not to say the price of things is really ever going down, but we need some time for things to just catch up. And this is just not the time. In fact, we've been waiting for a while for things to cool down so that some of these numbers would get better, and they really aren't. The first time we looked at single-family homes on the remnant lots on Thomas Street back a few years ago, they were $200,000 then, and we thought that was a terrible price. Now they're way more, and so I think in the interim, it makes sense for us to reject this proposal. We really do need to go back to the drawing board. I do think that we should also, though, when we do that, direct our staff to look for those larger impact projects. Recognizing too, and I think part of their frustration is when they've brought us higher density projects, sometimes we fought those projects based on zoning and site selection. And, Wyatt Street comes to mind and a few others. And so, I think that, we too, in a number of ways, based on our prior decision making, we've been responsible for some good projects getting away from us as well. But I just don't feel that this is one of those. I think the other option we have, and our staff has been trying to figure out a way to utilize these lots for an awfully long time. Maybe we are coming to the point, they're smaller lots, and maybe we are coming to a point where we just need to list those sites with a realtor, let someone just sell them, and let the private sector build whatever they believe they can make successful. And if it's one unit for some builder, fine, but if it's a duplex or if it's, something else, I think maybe the market could dictate what some of those lots become as well. So, I think that should be a consideration. I guess I would be interested really to hear from our economic development director as to what direction he thinks we really should go to get that larger impact, and really his thoughts on this specific project in terms of its economic shortcomings. So, Randy, if you could just offer some insight for us.
Director Freifrick, you're up.
Thank you, Alder Rasmussen. Thank you, Mayor. Yes, obviously this has been a long project. We've been working on this for a long time. We went through 4 different iterations of bids, taking them in. The first 3 unsuccessful. The 4th time we only received this 1 bid. It's frustrating because we know we need housing. We have these infill lots that aren't of value to our community. They're green space. We're not getting any value out of them from the city perspective. They're not providing any housing. As Alder Rasmussen stated, the price is high. That's something that we noted right away. And the reach that we have with this project, helping one family, that's not going to be a silver bullet to saving our housing shortage, our crisis. We need to find a way that we can find density, create density with some of these opportunities. I think we can see some savings in terms of unit cost as well. $350,000 for 1 unit for 1 housing family versus getting down to not necessarily all high density developments in terms of residences, but looking for opportunities with duplexes, 4plexes where it makes sense. Obviously, we have some infill homes, some single family lots that we'll have to continue to work at to find solutions at that single family level. But we're always willing to continue to move on. There's opportunities there. We're always learning about new opportunities and new things that could potentially work. We're really hopeful that this would work out. We've tried. I think this is an indictment of where the market's at. in terms of where the cost's at. It's just unfortunate. But when you look around and see other developers, what they're building for new stick-built single families, it's in that 350, or I'll say 325 to 400,000 for a 13 to 200 or 2,000 square foot home. It's not completely out of the realm. This is difficult as well from a building perspective, in that you don't have a surplus of land to be working off of. You're doing an infill when you have houses on both sides. It's a city standard lot. I think it's 60 by 120. But just based on having to be that last block going into the puzzle, there's not a whole lot of room around it. So we're always willing to try to find new solutions. It's going to take time. It's going to take patience. We're starting to run out of that, as we want to, everybody's eager to see some type of movement on our housing crisis and utilizing of these ARPA money, but we're here to work with you and look forward to conclusion of this particular item and how we can work together to move forward.
Thank you. Alder Lukens.
Thank you, Mayor. I just wanted to share, I agree with Alder Rasmussen wholeheartedly. I wanted to just share a few things. I've talked with and received communications from quite a few people. And I also want to thank the Community Development and Economic Development staff, because I know that they really have tried. I talked with them, before our meeting last week, and was asking many of the same questions that residents asked me. And I do want to also thank the number of residents that contacted me, because I think that we have a lot of skilled people, a lot of people with experience that have something to offer. So a few of the questions that I received, and I just want to say this on the record for anyone who might be watching, because I got a lot of the same questions. And so people were wondering about, what about selling the property to people living on each side of the lot? City staff tried and they received no response. What about donating the lot to Habitat for Humanity? Again, staff tried. Habitat for Humanity wasn't interested in that. They don't want that. What about using the money to provide rental assistance to low-income families? And or provide financial assistance to low-income families to maintain their homes. The funding can't be used in that manner. And what about providing down payment assistance to families for which the house was to benefit? The city already has a down payment assistance program, and the thing is, the same as Alder Rasmussen had said, if that down payment assistance program, that's going to go to people who would not otherwise be able to afford the upkeep of a house, the taxes and the things like that, costs like that on a house that would cost this much. So in my conversations and in my own, thinking about this, I was going to motion to refer this back to committee, but I think if we don't approve this, it will go back to committee, correct? Is that correct? Can I ask maybe parliamentarian? Is that correct, that if we don't approve this, it would automatically go back?
I don't believe it goes back. I think it just dies, although they've said they'll continue to look at, opportunities and continue to try to develop affordable housing. But yes, this is resolutions before you tonight on the recommendation of the ED committee. So if it fails, it's done.
It's done, okay. For this specific, contractor, builder, whatever.
Based on our agenda tonight, we're strictly talking about this single bid that we received for this single property.
Okay.
So you have the opportunity to accept the bid. We would move forward with that, try to work with the developer to see if there are some cost savings that we could incorporate in. No guarantees of that, or you have the opportunity to reject the bid.
Okay, thank you. That helps. Thank you both. And I guess what I would like to do in terms of, maybe looking at density for a number of these lots, but for this one, I did hear from some people that have been in the building trade for a long time. Some contacted me with ideas, so that is something that maybe then I could share with your department. So I also then will not be voting in favor of this motion. Thank you.
Thank you. And Randy and Tammy are still have goals, and they'll keep on working to try to. This money was put into the CDA and other areas, and the direction given. We'll be working on it. Okay, let's see. Alder Larson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I also will not be supporting this. I kind of agree with, mark this again on the calendar with Alder Rasmussen, that, you know, maybe we ought to just give up on some of these fills and turn it over and let the private industry, private sector take and build on these lots. Not that it's a good idea, because, you know, there's a lot that's been just kind of, they're building in my district, that they raised it up so far that there's gonna be a drainage issue that somehow the city inspections department let go. But anyway, that's a story for a different day. And when it comes to a house, if we do end up keeping lots and looking for infills, I too, then again, echo if Randy says we're looking at maybe putting duplexes or fourplexes on lots, I would just exercise one caution, and that is, before you do that, you know, before you start surveying the land and doing such, get in touch with this neighborhood first, because that was a big blunder when it came to a project in my district that got turned down. And second of all, I urge you to, I'm going to go back in my history a little bit. Back when I was a young guy working in Racine, the government had a project called 235 homes, where they would build you a house and you put $235 down and you make your payments on the house. Well, they didn't build big extravagant houses with garages and stuff. They just built a house, and just a plain, simple, not very large, but small house. You know, and so I ask you to, if you're going to be looking at some of these infill sites, take a ride through my district. And when I say my district, I'm going to say specifically from 17th Avenue west to 22nd Avenue on the 900 block. That would be between Sherman and Rosecrans. Because you will see such a smorgasbord of houses. I mean, there's little itty bitty small houses that people are thriving in. Do they have garages? No, they don't have garages, but they're small and they work. There's medium-sized houses, there's new houses, but that's, you know, if we're going to be, if we're in a pinch for money, we don't have to build a mansion. We just need to build a starter that gives somebody a roof over their head. You know, it doesn't have to be a fancy 3-car garage or even a garage at all. I really encourage you to go through these streets, right, and look at the different sizes and the varieties of homes, because you will find that these are not mansions, they're not expensive homes, and I'm sure they could probably be built for, I'm not a contractor, I don't know the first thing about prices or how much it costs to build a house. You know, perhaps we could even look at contracting with, I'm just gonna, with some, these Wausau homes or Stratford homes, or see what they can put together for some kind of project, for some kind of small prefab home to put on these lots that will be affordable. I just think there's so many other options out there, but I strongly encourage you to come and take a look through my district at the variety of homes, and thank you for the work you do, but I just can't separate, I just can't, you know, 350,000 and affordable homes are kind of like clean and diesel. They don't belong in the same sentence, you know, and so thank you for your work and thank you for your time. I'm done.
Thank you. The 235 home, that's a blast from the past.
You remember those too?
Oh, yeah. You betcha. Alder Killian.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
I want to agree that this project probably isn't workable, so I can't support it. But I do want to acknowledge the work that Randy and Tammy have put into this. I know it has been a terrible struggle getting this bid, and I'm grateful for all the work you do, so thank you. The city, I really want to make it clear, though, that I am going to be supportive of single-family homes on certain infill lots in the city, because the city made a commitment to the residents on certain of these infill lots, and it was done through extensive public input processes with federal money. And I believe the city has an obligation to keep those commitments to the residents. Again, I don't have a lot to say. I think the $200,000 gap that we're seeing on this house is certainly excessive, and we can't afford to support that. But there are many, many homes on the market right now that are in the 160 to 180, 185,000 range that are nice two-bedroom homes. I think the issue is a stick-built home, and I don't know that all stick-built homes that are 2 bedrooms, 1,100 square feet are going to come up to 348, 350,000. That seems awfully high to me. I don't certainly have that data to support exactly what I'm saying, but that does seem high. So I would look to our staff to see if they can fulfill the obligation they have made to the community on some of the infill lots that we have available, and possibly selling some of those that we don't have obligations to fulfill might be a good idea. Thank you.
Randy.
Yeah, I mean, it's all good conversation. The one thing I wanted just to be clear on this is that as part of our bidding process for this, we were looking to do a modular home. That's what we received from Stratford Homes back there, ultimately, where the supplier, the builder is getting that home from. The struggle, or maybe the benefit, and the reason we are going for the modular home is it helps us with our funding. We're able to use CDBG funding for the purchase of that modular home. And if we were to go stick-built, that does not qualify for CDBG funding. So that's one of the reasons we opted to go this route. We also were hoping that it would be some cost savings on the modular home, as well as quicker to market, that they're able to build it in the shop and bring it onto site, and we would have a quicker timeline. So that's just some of the reasoning behind how the proposal was brought forward to the specific developers.
And I probably misspoke. I should have said modular, Randy.
Yeah.
So, I am going to support single-family homes on some of those infill lots.
Thank you. Alder Hanky.
Thank you. So I heard a lot of talk about letting this go to the private market and letting them see what that would put on that lot. If this quote is accurate, which I feel it's a little high, not outlandishly high, my question is, and my big concern is, who's going to be building single-family homes in the next 10 years? If it's not subsidized somehow, no one is going to be building single-family homes. And that really scares me. We have a new subdivision going in out by 72nd Avenue. That's going to be a good barometer of, are we even able to build single-family homes in this day and age? So that's all I had to add to this. Thank you.
Thank you. Alder Martins.
Okay, thank you. Since I first ran for office, one of the key items on my platform was affordable housing, and a core component of affordable housing is to have housing at all levels. And since I've sat on council, I've consistently have championed and called for housing, housing types of all sizes and shapes, affordable housing, the market rate housing that we see going up right now downtown, and the infill housing, and I feel a lot of the frustrations. I think that our ED department and the CDA are feeling now, in that affordable housing is very tough to bring to market. In this day and age, I do not believe that we can provide affordable housing to this community without some sort or shape of subsidy. And we just have to accept that if we want affordable housing in this day and age, it's gonna be subsidized in some way, shape, or form, and that means that's us, the taxpayers, will have to help provide for that. And there's benefits for that. Good housing helps lift everybody up. It brings people to, it'll bring people to the community. Market rate housing opens up less expensive housing opportunities for people that need it. So as people move from one housing shape and style to the other. So housing of all types are necessary and they're important, and they're needed in our community. I'd love to see infill housing go into this lot on West Bridge Street. I think the realities when we see the bid here, the realities of it is that it's expensive. It's very expensive, and I don't think that I don't believe that like I said, this an independent, if we sold the lot, somebody might be able to come in and bring in a house for less. I don't think you're going to see a house there for less than $250,000, $280,000 though. Unfortunately, we sold some infill lots on Sherman Street 4 or 5 years ago, and I think those houses ran back then for 175, 180. So it's a possibility that selling these infill lots may spur new development in those lots, but I think it's just reality is that we're not going to. Housing is new, single-family housing is expensive, and if we're going to bring affordable housing to the market, we're going to have to subsidize it. With that said, I've always been on the side of approving housing projects of all shapes and forms, but I think with this particular project, I'm gonna, just because of the sheer cost of it, and I think with the off chance that we can do better, and maybe with something with a higher level of density or something, to come up with something that just works on a financial standpoint, I'm not going to support this. And then just finally say that if we want affordable housing, we just have to get behind it and say, this is what we're going to do to bring affordable housing, and then and not just pay lip service to wanting to create affordable housing.
Thank you. Alder McLean.
Well, surprised, I'm not supporting this. I think everyone knows that by now. And I want to be sure, I have gotten a lot of feedback, and I think it's important. I talked to Randy today, and I said, I think it's important that you know that the people that contacted me, almost to the person, was not against affordable housing. They're against this project, and I think that is very much something we need to point out. I don't think this is an affordable housing discussion as much as this housing project just doesn't make financial sense. It doesn't make financial sense in the gap. We have such needs. I sat with a 3-hour homeless task force meeting last Wednesday, and LaCrosse County, City of LaCrosse came in and talked about their 5-year strategic plan, and we'll be bringing this to you. But housing is number one in everything, and what they're looking at, they had a lot of very high-end HARPA pushes, is looking for density, peer housing, peers being in the housing instead of staff that are paid for that. And that is starting to work. So those are the things we are going to, the chief and I are going to be coming between you and county board and other municipalities we may need to look at. So when I see one family maybe for a $200,000 payout, it just doesn't make sense to me. I also understand the northeast side in Riverview was hit with a horrendous ice hailstorm in July of 2023. I have PTSD of how much OSB costs. I absolutely understand the costs of even fixing a house, replacing siding, replacing roof. We all have roofs, we all have that. It is $20,000, $40,000, you know, that is what it is. And I said, hey, what do you mean 10,000 for OSB? And they go, oh, it used to be cheap, but now it isn't anymore. So I absolutely understand where this amount is, but it doesn't make financial sense. And when we look at these kind of housing, affordable housing, we have to look at the taxes, man. I mean, this is at least $6,500 of what I kind of guesstimated a year in taxes, plus insurance. I'll have Alder Rasmussen talk about insurance, but I pay almost $2,500 a year now, and that's not unusual in my area because of, I think, the hailstorm, but it's a real big chunk out. So we have to look at the entire picture. I think we can do some affordable housing, but I don't think we can force a single family right now. I think that, you know, Randy and I talked, let's look at what makes financial sense with helping the most amount of people, because that's what we have. We don't have one or two families that need housing. We have people that don't have roofs over their head that we have some responsibility for as well. So we really have to look at the big picture. Thank you.
Thank you. Alder Neal.
Thank you. Well, I join several others in not going to support this measure tonight. I just want to interject one thing, though, with the uncertainties facing us from Washington over the next 4 years. Now, it might take a year or two for certain things to happen, but I just want to make sure we have a real sense of urgency about making use of available funds before defunding maybe happens. So I just want to keep that on our radar screen. I cannot feel confident that this sort of programming will continue after like 2 years from now. Thank you.
Thank you. Alder Lukens.
Thank you. So I just wanted to echo, I agree with so many of you here. I think everyone, including Alder Henke, I'm worried about, you know, single-family housing too. And, you know, one of the, we need density, we need housing ASAP for all levels. And it's not just here. This is throughout the state, this is throughout the country. And so it's my own daughter, you know, in a duplex, and this isn't in Wausau, but it's local. I mean, it's outrageous, the rents, and anyone with kids, it's like there has to be some end to this. So I guess, you know, I would prefer to see some homes as well, single-family homes, but again, at this cost, you know, it's just not doable. And I would also say that, like Alder McElhaney said, you know, of all the people that contacted me, they weren't against housing exactly. It was just, it's the cost of this. So anyway, I hope that we can find some other options. And again, I thank you for all your hard work, because I know it's been a frustrating process for staff. So thank you.
Thank you. Sounds like, feedback we're all getting is nobody's against some subsidies to get this going. It's the magnitude that we're looking at and this lottery nature. We got a $200,000 spiff and one person's going to be the lucky draw. So, you know, the lottery isn't a way to fulfill our housing needs either. And we should be responsible, whether it's federal or city funds, to be spending it wisely. And I guess lastly, I would comment that the chair of finance and the finance director, we're going to be talking and looking at our long-term strategy on debt. The debt service is a large portion of our taxes, so we need to have a strategy looking forward to how we keep that down so we can stay competitive and get people to be building in here of all types, and that frees up homes for everybody. And without seeing seeing no further questions.
You may begin voting. Motion fails 1 to 10.
All right, we are up to suspension of the rules. We're going to looking for a motion to suspend the rules under 6B, filing and/or 12A, referral of resolutions requires 2/3 vote. Motion from Watson, second from Neal.
You may begin voting. Motion passes 11 to 0.
Okay, up next is file number 250104. It's council resolution approving preventive maintenance program agreement with Schindler Elevator Corporation, and that was voted on at finance, and I didn't catch the vote. That was a unanimous vote prior to this in finance. I have a motion from Neal, second from Watson. Seeing no discussion.
You may begin voting. Motion passes 11 to 0.
Up next is file number 210522. It's a council resolution approving amendments to the City County Information Technology Commission intergovernmental agreement and operating agreement, and that as well passed unanimously. Oh, that's that IT agreement that, help me out here, where'd this come from?
It came straight from, it didn't go to a standing committee, it came straight to council. Which is why the rule
Okay.
12A was.
So we have a motion from Lucan, second from Watson. Any questions on that? Seeing none.
You may begin voting. Motion passes 11 to 0.
Up next, public comment and suggestions. Seeing none, I would entertain a motion to adjourn. Motion from Watson, second from Neal. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
See ya. Happy New Year.
I stopped guessing because I'm always wrong. It's a short agenda. It tends to be a lot of discussion.
Okay. Yeah, super quiet.